Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my April wrap-up. So it has been a minute since I filmed. I took last week off because there's a lot that has been going on in my life. Nothing bad has been happening, but it's just been a lot of things that are happening at the same time that I just needed to process, so I just took a week off. Also on top of that, Z from You Can't Catch Z actually spent almost a week visiting last week. Well, the week before last week, I guess, technically. And so I wanted to spend time with her. No, I didn't vlog it because I'm a bad booktuber, but just take our word for it, it happened. It was a lot of fun, and we had a great time. But that also meant that there wasn't much filming to be had that week, and then I just did not have the energy to do anything last week, like during the week. So here we are. It is time for my April wrap-up. I'm just gonna jump right into it so that this isn't super long. I shifted, and that's because I stood up to film something in the middle of doing this, and Ember decided to take my spot. So we are off center now, and I'm just going to go from here. So in terms of stats, I had a really good reading month, and I actually managed to finish 9 books, which blows my mind a little bit just because I really wasn't expecting to have that good of a month, what with everything that has happened over the last few weeks. But I managed to finish 9 for a total of 3,580 pages, and out of those 9, 4 of them were arcs and 2 of them were rereads. I also did a little bit better on my series reads, so this time I actually read 4 in a new series, but 5 in a continuing series. So this time I continued more than I started new series, and that's big for me. As far as the format goes, I read 1 physically, 5 on ebook, and 3 in both physical and ebook form. Genre's probably not that surprising because this is exactly what I expect to come out of a month where I'm trying hard not to slump, but I only read 3 fantasies this month, and I read 6 romances. I tend to lean a little bit heavier on the romance just to try and keep myself out of a reading slump because those never put me into a slump. I can read romance at any day, any time. It doesn't even matter. I love reading romance to get myself out of a reading slump, and this was the case over the entire course of the month of April. The stars that I gave also really reflect the kind of reading month that I had because I ended up having 5 4-star reads and 4 5-star reads because, again, the slump, I was picking up things that I was actually, like, sure that I was going to enjoy. Anything that I wasn't really sure about, I honestly ended up just putting down and waiting for this to be over so that I can get to it at a later date. So right now, I'm just trying to focus on things that I know I'm going to like. As far as the book types go, I read 1 novella, 1 anthology, and 7 novels. And then finally, all 9 books were all adult. So, what did I end up reading throughout the entire course of April? The first book that I started and finished was Arcanum Unbounded by Brandon Sanderson. I talked about this in my April TBR. This was a book for the magical readathon for the anthology, or the collection of short stories. And so I started and finished Arcanum Unbounded, and I loved it. I had already read a couple of short stories in that particular collection, but there were a lot of new ones also that I really loved, and I was really surprised about that. I don't remember the names of them, but I do remember there was one that took place on a collection of islands that had like these magical birds kind of a thing, and that was probably one of my favorites. There was another one that felt like it was a very western frontier kind of a feel, and the main character was somebody who was a bit of a bounty hunter, but the magic system involved like shades that would touch you and drain you dry of your like livelihood. And so that was really cool as well. There were a lot of stories in that particular collection that I really liked, but that were also new to me. Also, I got to reread Emperor's Soul, and that was just a huge treat because I love Emperor's Soul. I haven't shut up about it since I read it last December. It's definitely my favorite short story that Brandon Sanderson has written out of all of the ones that I've tried at this point. So obviously, Arcanum Unbounded got a 5 for me. The next book that I picked up was one of those romances that I mentioned, and that is Pestilence by Laura Thalassa. This is the first book in her Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse series. It is a romance series pertaining to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. I think that it kind of verges a little bit on dark romance because the main characters are not great people. I mean, like, the female protagonists usually aren't that bad, but obviously the male protagonists are the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and they are, like, murdering civilization in droves. So that's a little bit of a thing that they have to overcome in their relationship. Pestilence was no different. He was spreading the plague across North America, and the woman who falls in love with him, whose name I cannot recall, is a firefighter who drew the short straw with the rest of her firefighting house to be the one to stay behind and attempt to kill Pestilence. And she does, like, set him on fire and shoots him and stuff, but he is immortal and he can't die. And he got pretty pissy about that and, like, decided to take her on a journey with him to, as punishment, to show her all of the awful things that he's doing to humanity. And she ends up falling in love with him. It's a journey, and it was a good journey. Like, I gave it 4 stars. I did actually really enjoy it. I think I enjoyed it more than the following book, which was War, which I also read last month. I liked War. I had a bit of a bigger problem with what War was doing than Pestilence. I don't really know why that is. I don't have a way to describe it. But War obviously follows that particular Horseman of the Apocalypse. This time it takes place in Jerusalem. The main character, Miriam, I believe she is actually Jewish. War battles everywhere. He's like trying to take over with his hordes of, well, he's got like a zombie horde, and he also has like a bunch of people that decided to follow him, and so he's just kind of battling every single city that they come across and leaving nobody behind unless they decide to join him. And Miriam takes pretty big issue with this for obvious reasons, but along the way she too falls in love with him, and it was an interesting journey. I gave that one 4 stars also. I am interested to move on to Famine. I will be interested to see where these go. I don't think that they're my favorite paranormal fantasy romance of all time, but they are an interesting read, and they do tend to be a quick read, even though they're like 500 pages. Next up, I read The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. I have a vlog where I talk a little bit more about this in depth, so I'm not going to go too in depth on what I thought about this while I was reading it, but I did really enjoy it. I ended up giving it a 4 stars. This follows Conrad von Valt, who is an Emperor's Justice. He's very much like The Great Coats, if you've read that, by Sebastian de Castell, where he travels across the country and he acts as the judge, jury, and executioner when the Emperor can obviously not be everywhere at once. But you actually follow this story from the eyes of his clerk, whose name is Helena, and she is an obnoxious 19-year-old girl. That's the worst part of the story, in my opinion, is the fact that Helena is the narrator. It's a narrator written as a 19-year-old girl from an old white man's perspective. Just some characteristics about it are not 100% correct, but I enjoyed the underlying story enough that I was able to overlook most of that and still enjoy it thoroughly. So I really liked this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and if any of that sounded interesting to you, I highly recommend that you pick it up. The next book that I read was A Quarter to Midnight by Karen Rose. This is the first installment in one of her next upcoming series that takes place in New Orleans. If you've been around on my channel for a while, you know who Karen Rose is. I talk about her all the time. She is my favorite romantic suspense author, bar none, and this book honestly didn't disappoint. I don't want to tell you guys too much about it because spoilers, but essentially you're following a PI named Molly and an award-winning famous chef by the name of Gabe. Gabe's father was recently murdered, even though it was pronounced as a suicide, and he hires Molly and her boss in an attempt to figure out who killed him and find out the underlying conspiracy that's going on in the city of New Orleans as they fall in love. It was very sweet. It was also, there was lots of corruption and police corruption and all of that stuff going on in the background. I really, really liked it. I gave it 5 stars. This is again going to be in a vlog that I am in the middle of filming, so I'm not going to talk too much about my thoughts on it here, but I did really like it. Next up is Grin and Beard It by Penny Reed. This was one of the romance novels that I started reading to try and get myself out of that slump, and it worked. Grin and Beard It was fantastic. I was in this mood for a celebrity falls in love with a normal person kind of trope, and Grin and Beard It delivered. You follow a woman who is a famous actress, famous comedian. She is, I believe, like Oscar winning and all of these things. Like, she's America's sweetheart. She's in the middle of filming this movie that takes place in probably backwoods Tennessee, because that's where they are located, and she runs into this very attractive park ranger named Jethro as she gets lost trying to find the way to the cabin that she is staying at. He helps her find her way, and they kind of just keep meeting in that way because she has a terrible sense of direction. At first he doesn't know who she is, and then he does learn, and he kind of figures out what he's getting himself into, but he's mostly okay with it. This was funny and endearing and sweet, and I technically jumped ahead in the Beard series by Penny Reed. I'm definitely gonna have to go back to the beginning and start there because I loved her writing style so much. I love the story so much. It was just so easy to read at a time when I really, really needed that, and I loved this. I gave it a 5 stars. The next book that I read is The Steel of Wraithscar by Randall Garrett and Vicky Ann Hadron. I would hold it up, but I'm honestly too lazy to go and grab it. This is the first book in the Gondolara cycle, and it's a book that I've talked about a couple of times on my channel before. I haven't read it since I was a teenager. I really, really liked it when I did read it then, as my uncle had recommended it to me. It's this interesting take on portal fantasy in which a man named Ricardo starts off the story as an older man on a yacht. He's just found out that he has cancer or something along those lines, and it is terminal. And he's standing there talking to a woman, and out of nowhere, I think like a comet kind of appears, and they think that they die, but he wakes up in the middle of a desert. He's next to a dead man, and he starts trying to figure out what he needs to do, and so he starts crawling across the desert. A gigantic cat shows up, and he thinks the cat's going to eat him, but the cat instead helps him get to a village where he learns that he's in a different body. People are calling him by a different name, and things are not really like they are on Earth anymore. So he's really trying to figure out what's going on, and the storyline behind all of this is also that a famous jewel has been stolen from his city that he is from in the Portal Fantasy world, and he's trying to figure out who actually stole that jewel to clear his now father's name. It's a little bit convoluted, but it was really, really good. It's obviously pretty reminiscent of your traditional 80s fantasy. There was a lot of really clunky exposition, a lot of very convenient things that happen to tell you exactly the right thing at the exact right time, but it was still fun. I still enjoyed it, and honestly, it didn't fall into a lot of the holes that a lot of 80s fantasy falls into. I didn't really notice any blatant sexism. There was a little bit of inadvertent racism in some terms that were used, nothing too outrageous, but it was just things that are not acceptable to say anymore, so that was probably the worst that it got. Outside of that, I still really enjoyed my time with it. I did give it a 4 out of 5 stars. We're almost to the end now. Next, I picked up Night Pleasures by Sherilyn Kenyon. I have talked about the Dark Hunter series on my channel before as well. This is the first book in the Dark Hunter series. Well, the first book actually in the Dark Hunter series, but not the first book that she wrote in that world. But I did pick it up because I had this idea in my head that I might start reading the Dark Hunters again from beginning to end. I had been just kind of picking them up sporadically as I found them and just reading them because there is a story going on in the background, but most of the love stories are pretty self-contained, so it hadn't really mattered to me what was going on in the background as long as I got a good romance out of it. I think that the writing definitely increases in style as the story does go on, like as the books do go on, so I'm really hoping to see that because as it was pretty cheesy. Let me just say, it was pretty cheesy going back and rereading this first one after having read some of the later ones now. But I still gave it a 4 out of 5 stars just because it was nostalgic for me and I really, really enjoyed my time. And then the very last book that I picked up, also to fulfill a prompt in the Magical Readathon, was Switchbitter by Sarah Ney. This is technically a novella that takes place like after the second book in the series, I think. Maybe? So I did jump ahead to read this, but it was the only book that I owned that would fit this prompt, and so I decided to just pick it up anyway. And it was really cute. It's literally only 43 pages long. It was a fun time. I actually can't wait to see more of Ryder and Piper together because I really enjoyed these 43 pages with them like a lot. It was funny, it was steamy, it was really, really cute. So I think I'm definitely going to have to move the Jacro series up higher on my priority list. Sports romance is just such a good time for me always, so I think I really need to just read Jock Hard. Is that the first one, or is that the name of the series? Whatever the first book in the series is, I need to make it a priority to pick it up. But I did give this a 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed reading it, and I can't wait to read the rest of them. Now it is honorable mention time. I am in the middle of 3 different books right now, and the first of which is Children of Ragnarok by Cinda Williams-Chima. This is the first book in her upcoming Runestone Saga series. I believe it's coming out at the end of this year. Y'all know I love Cinda Williams-Chima. I was fortunate enough to be able to get an arc of this book, and I'm so excited for it. I am barely into it. I think I'm maybe on like chapter 5 or something, but so far I'm really liking the characters. I'm really liking the world building. It does seem to be taking place in a very Viking-centric, obviously, world. It's very reminiscent of the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne, but it is YA, so I think it's definitely going to be toned down in violence. However, a lot of the terms and all of that stuff are pretty consistent in terms of like the Viking stuff, so I'm enjoying that. I am barely into it. I don't really have any opinions yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm gonna like it. Next up is A Rip Through Time, which is a new book from Kelly Armstrong. If y'all haven't seen the TV show Bitten that was all about the Canadian werewolves, it's the same author who wrote those books. This is her new historical time travel fantasy, and it is about a Canadian cop who was visiting, I believe, her grandmother in Edinburgh. During that visit, she kind of somehow gets sucked back in time into the 1860s Scotland and thrown into somebody else's body. Also, I'm barely into this. I am enjoying the interesting time that she's having trying to make herself fit in with the culture, I guess, of Scotland in the 1860s and how different it is from 2020 North America as it stands. So that's been entertaining, but again, I'm barely into it, so I don't really have any opinions on that either. The last thing that I have started that I have been half-heartedly listening to, because y'all heard me talk about how audiobooks have been for me, But I did pick up book 3 in the Great Coat series on audio. Those books just work on audio for me. I have yet to actually read one all the way through physically because I love the narrator. I love the tone that he uses throughout the entire thing. And honestly, I feel like parts of it are a little bit slow that if I don't listen to them audibly, I don't know, I just wouldn't like it as much. So I am really enjoying that. I don't remember what the third book is called, so I'm sorry. But yeah, I'm enjoying that. I'm barely into it though. Again, that's the theme of these last 3, so I'll let you guys know what I think about that if I've finished it by the end of this month. Okay, so the last thing to talk about in this is the magical readathon that obviously took place throughout the course of April. Obviously, the books that I had planned, I did not finish my entire April TBR. There are a couple that got left out. Maybe one book that got left out that I switched out with something that I read. So let's just go through the prompts. The first one is Elemental Studies, which is read a book under 100 pages. That obviously is Switchbitter by Sarah Ney. 43 pages, comes in under 100, and I really, really loved it. So that prompt is checked off the list. Next is Spells and Incantations, which is to read a book that is a collection of short stories or essays. That is Arcanum Unbounded by Brandon Sanderson. Next up is Conjuration, a source of light on the cover. Honestly, for this, I went with Pestilence by Laura Thalassa because he's glowy. Like, he's got the glowy symbols on him and stuff. That's what we're calling a source of light. Because they were a source of light in the books, they kind of like glow all the time, so it counts. Next is Restoration, a book featuring healers, and for this I picked The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan because there is a healer in that book. He is the town healer, I guess. He's also kind of like the morgue attendant / coroner. But he does do healing, and so that is why this fits that prompt. And then finally, I ended up picking up a guild quest, and that is to read a book with a cat on the cover, because I think I was trying to help somebody find their lost cat or something along those lines. And for that, I picked The Steel of Wraithscar, because there is a gigantic cat on that cover. It's called a Sha'um, and they ride them around like horses. It's delightful. So with all of that, I did actually finish all of my prompts for the Magical Readathon, which is really, really good because I wasn't sure how that was going to go when I started deviating from that TBR. But I had a great time with it. I can't wait to see what we do in August, and honestly, I'm just glad that I finished all the things that I needed to finish. And that is it for my April wrap-up. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Down in the description box, you're going to see a rep code for Hello Lovely Bot that'll get you 15% off of your order. Underneath that are links to my Goodreads, my Twitter, and my Instagram in case you guys wanted to follow me on any of those. But that's it for me today, guys, so I'll talk to you in my next one. Bye!